Hey, I think my double check, make sure my audio is working here. And it is good. What is going on, everyone? So I have no real clue on these live videos here. So we'll see how this goes. But I see that a lot of you are there. I see James, I see Craig, Andrew, lots of people following. So pretty cool. I do have a few questions that people ask on Instagram, so I'll be able to get to those, and also some updates on the book and anything else that might come to mind. But yeah, there's some cool people here. So let me go to a couple of the questions that were asked on Instagram. Tim McGlynn says, I know it'd be off-brand for you, but I've noticed some stars showing up in your pre-dawn shot or Sony camera. Have you ever played with astrophotography? And I have not, though I will say that I do enjoy being able to have those stars in the video because it kind of gives a sense of being there. But it's definitely one of those very technical sides of photography, and I think I got my my plate full pretty much already. Cool people are turning out here. See, Andrew now. Andrew and I, we've bumped into each other in Zion quite a bit, and he's very lucky enough to live pretty close by. Though, unfortunately, it's closed at the moment. And Alan says astrophotography is the way to go. But I've also seen that you have probably about like 70 pounds of equipment or something like that you got set up in your driveway. Yeah. So how's everyone doing with the whole quarantine lockdown thing? I don't know about you guys, but my wife and I are very much homebodies, so it doesn't change too much for us, but I know it's affected a lot of people. And I hear my wife streaming this in the other room. I think she was threatening to troll me a little bit on here, but we'll see if that happens. Costa Rica. Nice. It's pretty cool. So who's like at the craziest time of day right now? I tried to schedule this so it's decent for people in the UK as well as here in the US, but I've no concept of what time elsewhere. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, 3 weeks in England. I think it's been about 3 weeks here as well. And it's crazy because I find that time just is really going by pretty fast. And at least in this area, I think it's been extended until like mid-May, somewhere in there. So I'm still hoping to be able to go on a backpacking trip here at some point once it settles down. 7 p.m. in Wales. That's not bad. Okay, let's see if there's any questions in there. Don't you feel? Let's scroll here. Don't you feel you may have to miss? I have a time reading. I'll tell you that right now. Feel you may have to give a miss to many opportunities being restricted to film. Oh yeah, for sure. I do give up a lot of opportunities when in film, but in many ways, it's kind of a nice thing because it helps funnel you to what you really can shoot. But there's times when it gets to be really frustrating when there's something that I really would like to shoot, but it just it gets to be difficult at times. But yeah, I definitely do give up a lot of opportunities by shooting film, but it gives me a sense of direction. So that's one of the things I really like about that. Let's see here. Will says he's got some 8x10 film holders that will hold the film flat for astro photos. That's are those the vacuum ones? I've heard about those before. I've never worked with those before. Though I also see how if you're shooting things straight down so that the film doesn't kind of bow a little bit, which can do some weird things. Let's see. Another thing too, my wife has proven to be amazing at getting deliveries from Amazon for groceries and stuff. So I think we've had like 7 deliveries of food that way. So there's definitely a way of doing that, but we've been trying to avoid going out to the store or anything like that. Let's see here. Any suggestion on cutting film down to size? So cutting, by that you mean cutting like a 8x10 down to a smaller size or something along those lines? I've never tried that before. I can see how that would be that'd be difficult keeping track of which side is which, because that's an important thing. Graham says, we all want to grow as artists. What are your long-time goals in photography? That's a good question. I think my long-term goal is just to keep it something that I enjoy. I never really intended to pursue photography as a career. I'm still not technically full-time doing photography, but I avoided doing photography as a career because I didn't want to take something I enjoy and make it into something that that feels like work. But as things have changed through the years, I've kind of drifted in that direction. And I am able to earn most of my income from photography these days, and especially for the past month or so when technically I'm doing this full time now. But yeah, my goal is just to keep it enjoyable and kind of avoid doing the things that make it feel like work. And so that's, I think, why I've been pretty consistent with things through the years. What is your best advice for someone just getting into large format? That's a tricky one. The biggest learning curves will be learning how to meter film, and the other one is learning each of those, how each different type of film responds to each situation. But if you're only new to large format photography, but not new to medium format or 35 millimeter, some of those things you might already know. Get a really good dark cloth for the camera. That is key. When I first started, I had to improvise, use a jacket or t-shirt or something like that. That didn't work out really well. I like the Beyond the Zone system dark cloth. It has an elastic attachment on the back. Also doubles as a weather cover, which is pretty nice. The cool thing about large format is that pretty much any lens you have is going to be a great lens. So you don't have to worry about, which lens is a little sharper than the others, because ultimately you're not enlarging the image all that much. So every single lens that I have has proven to be a very, very sharp lens. So I wouldn't worry too much about the specifics of the lenses. Is something modern for the camera. But yeah, it's a tough one. Take your time. That's key. Rushing large format is never really fun. Let's see here as things are flying past here. Would you shoot locally in San Diego now that not many are about? Well, also I'm not out and about right now. So as much as I would love to be able to go out and explore those areas, this is definitely time to stay basically just kind of in my neighborhood, go out for runs in the morning. It's itching to is all done, go out on a backpacking trip out in the middle of nowhere. And I have reservations for the Redwoods in June, but this still might very well be going on by then. So we will see on that. But I really should do some more local shooting. It's hard to do. I see Simon there. Simon's an expert on local shooting, that's for sure. Let's see here. Let's see. I see Larry here saying, "When do you prefer gray card metering rather than the usual average metering?" So this is something that came up on my last trip, where there's usually what I do is my light meter at the brightest area of a scene I want to hold detail in, the darkest area I want to hold detail in. I put each of those readings into the meter, I average it, and then you can kind of look through the meter and it'll tell you how bright and how dark all the subjects are. This works really well so long as you have bright, dark subjects in the scene. But I ran into a situation in Death, it was in my first video from Death Valley, where I didn't have really good reference points for bright and dark tones. So I just took a gray card, threw it on the ground, and that actually worked really well just to meter off that. The thing you have to be really careful when you do that is if you have a scene that naturally is quite bright or a scene that naturally is quite dark, it might be pushing the limits of the film. So I'm going to continue to try to use that technique, but what I think I might do is meter the gray card and then try to find the light and the dark areas as well, throw them all in the average, and that might help things a little bit. But you'll see some photos later in the winter trip where I was continuing to use the gray card technique, and it worked out really, really well. So I was very happy with that. And the gray card I use is the pop-up one. It's made by Elastolite, and so it's really weatherproof as well. Let's see here. Have you ever taken images on glass? I have not. I've just done traditional, regular film. Let's see here. Now, James Lane, I know he recently just got an 8x10 camera, and he says he's about to shoot his first 8x10 image this week. Which mistakes am I guaranteed to make? So let me save you some mistakes. I have a little technique that I do every time I'm working with large format, because there's something that everyone is going to do sooner or later, which is you set up your shot, you have the shutter of the lens open, you put your film holder in, you pull the dark slide, you realize that shutter is still open. So a really good technique you can do is with your cable release, click the shutter before you pull the dark slide. Because if the shutter doesn't click, it means it's either still open or something else is going on. So I always, close the shutter, cock the shutter, and then trigger it once before pulling the dark slide. Because hearing that click is what allows you to know that your shutter is closed. So that's one of the really common mistakes. The other thing, especially with 8x10, make sure you hold tight the back of the camera and push the ground glass up against the film holder when you pull that dark slide, because it has a tendency to pull out. You get a little light leak there. So those are two really big things there. Okay, let's see here. Craig says, considering you're not a full-time landscape photographer, would you mind me asking what your other job and how does it impact your time as a landscape photographer? So when I graduated from college in 2004, I went to work at a local camera store. And so I was working there full time. And back when the economy wasn't doing so well back in 2009, it was really quiet at the camera store. And so kind of to help them out, I decided to just voluntarily furlough myself and to go off on some photography trips. And so I would go on, I think I went on like 3 or 4 trips that year. There was a winter trip, a spring trip, a summer trip, fall trip, like four trips or so. I think I actually went to Zion twice in the fall that year because I didn't know what time the color was. But I just kind of kept that going up for quite a while. And that's why you see the seasonal trips that I go on. But then a few years ago, I decided to go from 5 days a week down to 4 days a week. And then the next year, 3 days a week. So just gradually transitioning to doing photography more and more. So at the beginning of this year, I started by doing working the day job just 1 day a week. And so now that everything is shut down because of the pandemic, I'm basically using all the time to do photography stuff. So that's been my transition, but still not technically full time with it. Eat peanuts while loading film. That is very, very important because some of you know the story on that one. But for those of you who don't know, I was in Zion National Park. This is 2018 or something like that. I had some honey roasted peanuts. I was eating those, and then I went to load some film, and I have my arms in my film changing back in the film changing tent in the back of my 4Runner, and I'm parked on the side of the road. The rear hatch is open. I got the radio playing, and I start choking and coughing a little bit on some little bit of peanut that's in my throat, and I'm trying to cough it out because I can't pull my arms out of the film changing tent. And then the Ed Sheeran song "Perfect" starts playing, and I'm coughing and I start crying on the side of the road there. And thankfully, no one passed by because otherwise the timing would have been pretty crazy with that. Okay, let's see here. I didn't see the first part, but I do see Will mentioning, yes, I do have a Rototrim back there. It's the 36-inch, really, really good trimmer. I use that a lot, so definitely a big fan of the Rototrim. Let's see here. How nervous are you posting off your negs for after a Zion trip? Now, here's the cool thing. I have a lab here in San Diego that I actually just drive them to the lab, and it's only about a 5-minute drive. So I'm really fortunate to have a lab nearby, though a little over a year ago, their processing machine went down. So I did have to mail my film to a lab up in Upper Michigan, and they did a fantastic job. It was, I think, AGX. Did a really, really good job. And the place I use here in San Diego is North Coast, and either place has done really well. But I would be nervous about that. Now, I do mail my film off to my friend Michael for drum scanning. And I always get a little nervous about that, but that's also why it's good to shoot doubles. Let's see. Ash says, have you been to Yellowstone? Huge potential. You will love it. Yes, I have been to Yellowstone, but not on a dedicated photography trip. My wife and I have been on many summer camping trips there, and I definitely do enjoy it. I wouldn't mind going there during the winter at some point. Let's see. Do you plan to include any other genre with landscape with your film? Not really, quite honestly. I find myself quite busy as is with the existing workload. Though at some point maybe it'd be nice to branch out a little, but time is the big thing. That's for sure. Let's see. Hi Ben, an alternative of the Artist Cube tripod head out there. I really like it, but man, that price. And yes, it is a very expensive tripod head. There are some other ones out there that are similar. They're all pretty expensive there. I forget the name of it. There's another company that makes a head kind of like that. But it's also one of the really higher end heads. For most people, the Cube is completely overkill. But for me, it's kind of nice because it can balance the size of the 8x10 camera, and the head itself is quite compact. And once you get used to that level of control, it is quite nice to have, but it is very expensive. The Manfrotto ones, they have some geared heads. They're pretty bulky and they have a little bit of slop to them. So with a really big camera, you'll notice that. With a smaller camera, you wouldn't notice that quite as much. David says, hello from Santa Barbara. Well, hello from San Diego. I know it's beautiful up there. Let's see. It says, hey Ben, how are you? How is the COVID-19 situation in San Diego? So here in California and also in San Diego, we started doing the whole social distancing thing pretty early on. So it hasn't been as bad here as it has been in other areas that are more congested. We're pretty spread out here, so hopefully that is going to work in our advantage. But yeah, it's pretty crazy in some other areas. Why is film considered better for really long exposures? I really like that genre, but have never shot film. So here's the thing with film. Film in some ways is better. In other ways, digital is better. But in reality, both film and digital will have a hard time with really long exposures. So if we look at digital, for example, if you do a really long exposure, you'll have the pixels that fail in the exposures. Then you have to do the dark frame subtraction where you do a longer exposure of equal length, and it figures out where the dead pixels are. That does work very well. It's a little bit of an annoyance. With film, you have something called a reciprocity failure, which is even more annoying sometimes. So with certain films, they sort of lose their sensitivity with time. So for example, if I were to do even a 4-second long exposure on Velvia 50, I really need to use a 5-second long exposure. And so you have to add more and more time to the point where if my meter says to use a 30-second long exposure, I got to do a full minute. Some black and white films are really bad for that, where if you have to do like a 1-minute long exposure, you might have to use a 45-minute long exposure to get that amount of light. So I'd say that neither film or digital are perfect for that. Certain films are better than others. But I think digital has a bit of an advantage because you have all kinds of other techniques you can do. You can stack exposures and stuff like that. Let's see. As things are scrolling here. Terry says, what books are you reading? I've been doing a lot of reading lately. Well, not since the whole lockdown thing. I've just been busy working. Man, I don't have my Kindle in front of me right now, but I'll have to send you a message or something. But yeah, I've been reading a lot of books, a lot of World War II sort of stuff, a lot of stories stemming from that. But the titles off the top of my head aren't coming to me at the moment. Let's see here. It says, do you think that film production will be affected from this COVID-19 situation to the point that we might have problems buying our film in the near future? I think everything's going to get affected by this. So film and everything else, certain things might be stockpiled to a certain extent, but I think we'll be seeing the effects from this honestly for years to come. So It's good to already have a certain stockpile of film, but yeah, I think we'll have some effects from this. Thomas says, do you ever shoot black and white or just prefer to convert, and why? The reason I don't really do any black and white is I'm horrendous at developing. I tried trade developing. I tried using tubes. Either way, I was not really good at it. I think I need to get a like a Jobo sort of setup so I can process it myself. And then at that point, I'd probably be better at it. And I haven't done any converting or anything of the color for black and white. I know some people do that, but I really haven't tried that. Usually I shoot the scenes I do because it's the color that sort of catches my eye to begin with. I think I'd be pretty bad at black and white, but it's something I should try. Let's see here. Are we going to have a resurrection of the night vision animal cam? That is something that I did place on my winter trip when I was in Zion. I found some fresh mountain lion tracks. I didn't catch anything up though. And if there was a Outsiders Landscape Photography Conference that was going to happen in March, and I was going to go to that, and my plan was actually to place it in a canyon in Zion before we go to the conference, and then picking it up when I got back. But that unfortunately did not happen. Let's see here. James says, another starter question. When I've exposed my film and it's still in the holder, any tips on how to store the exposed film before sending it off to be processed? This is where having some extra boxes will that's the main thing. Beyond that, just make sure you don't have the film get cooked in a hot car or something like that. Not that it's much of an issue where you are, but it certainly can be an issue in other areas where it does get quite warm. And I do have a bunch of empty 8x10 film boxes. So if anyone is interested in any of those, maybe reach out to me and maybe that'll kind of get you guys up and running with that. Let's see here. Michael says, have you considered using the 8x10 Polaroid instant film? It looks like a great film, but I have to buy a whole new camera and equipment to use it. I have only a 4x5 setup right now. I will say that the thought of that has been quite appealing. And I know some people have done really, really well with some of the instant film. Nick Carver comes to mind with that. It's something that would be cool to try. But I know that there's some other equipment I have to get. There's like a processor I get and some stuff along those lines. It would be cool to try though. Let's see here. Looking to buy a new car for my photography trips. Tell me about your 4Runner. So the 4Runner is awesome because I certainly don't have the money to have like a dedicated photography vehicle as well as a daily driver. So I need to have one car that can do both. And the 4Runners are good for that because it is possible to sleep in the back. You have to be a little creative in terms of taking out part of the back seat and the way you arrange things, but you can sleep in the back. It's really good for storing photographic gear. Areas where you're going off-road, it'll handle some pretty decent stuff. So it does make a really good balance between a daily driver and also as a photography vehicle. The other thing I've been looking at is if something ever happens to my 4Runner, maybe one of the long bed Tacomas, so I can have like a sleeping platform in the back, as well as have all the other gear in there. They're almost 3 feet longer than the 4Runners though, so it just barely fit in my garage. But yeah, definitely a big fan of 4Runners. This is my second 4Runner I've had. Andrew says, any trips planned to new locations in the future? Kind of. I'm really hoping to, at some point when the virus situation starts to go down and we can move about a bit more, I am really hoping to do some backpacking in southern Utah, and it's areas like new canyons that I haven't been to before, but still an area that I'm familiar with, at least as far as the access. And I'm also hoping to do the redwoods, but we'll see if that ever happens. Simon says the Arca Swiss Cube is a gem, a worthwhile investment, but not for everyone. And I definitely agree with that. If you can justify the expense of it, it's a beautiful piece of equipment, and hopefully it's something that will last you for the rest of your life. But it costs more than some cameras that are being placed on it. Simon says, what's your favorite tree to photograph and why? Um, I just love the cottonwood trees. They have so much character to them. They grow in some really gnarly areas, and they have this beautiful form to them. And I've seen some cottonwood trees full on get just blown down on the ground, a few roots still in the ground, and then it starts shooting branches upward, and it comes right back. So I'm definitely a big fan of cottonwood trees. And the other thing too is cottonwood trees, they have the leaves really flutter really nice in the wind. And so if it's a nice warm day and there's a breeze going on, it's just such a nice experience to be hanging out by them. Though I will say the redwoods are insane. Those, it's hard to even believe those are real. Harder to photograph though. Another Simon says, how often do you come across dangerous animals, snakes, etc.? And more to the point, have you ever been in any real danger? It's the areas where I go, there's no bears. Very seldom ever. I've never seen a snake in Death Valley. I've seen snakes in southern Utah, but I've only seen like 2 snakes there. I see a lot of snakes here locally if I go hiking here in San Diego, and they're pretty fascinating creatures, but I've never felt in danger by them. I think they're pretty cool. Mountain lions, those are the ones I'm more concerned with. They're very elusive. They avoid people. You'll almost never see them, but they do exist in Zion. And I try to avoid hiking in the washes, especially some narrow washes where there's like overhanging ridges, because they are ambush predators. And I just don't want to offer myself up as a sacrifice. In the same way that, I mean, I've got 2 cats. They're super calm, awesome. But yeah, at some point, if something triggers their instinct, they just change. And those of you guys who have seen Tiger King, so stuff can happen. Let's see here, and also I'm back to the issue about have I ever been in any real danger? From the biggest things you run into in the areas I go, probably dehydration and jumping from one area to another area and falling and having like mechanical injuries, legs, ankles, stuff like that. So I try not to jump, try to drink plenty of water. But my trip to southern Utah back in June of last year, where I fell into a river and was swept downstream, that was not fun. And it was one of those moments where things kind of slow down a little bit until you realize that I actually was floating pretty well. Let's see here. I did threaten to read the dictionary if I didn't have any questions. And so yes, I know that you came here for the dictionary reading, but unfortunately there are some questions to work with here. What do you think your average distance camera to subject is? I shoot a lot of stuff that's pretty close to the ground. I mean, for those close-up shots, I'd say my camera's probably a good 2 feet away, maybe somewhere in that range. I definitely do a lot of close-up stuff. That's about as close-up as I can shoot. I can shoot the 8x10 at about a 1:1 if I extend the lens long enough. It gets a little tricky doing that. Okay, Andy says, how do you handle changing light intensity during longer exposures? It's a lot easier when the light is building as opposed to when the light is fading, which is one of the reasons why I really enjoy shooting at morning. If I'm shooting in the evening and the light gets darker and darker and darker, there really isn't anything I can do other than just letting the exposure going until it's dark, and then I just close the shutter. That usually works out pretty well. But if the light levels are building, with large format, I have an external meter. And so as the light keeps changing, I keep metering the scene as the exposure is going. And in my mind, I'll just average how long my starting time was for the exposure, let's say 10 minutes. And pretty soon, it'll say like 4 minutes for the exposure. I just keep averaging those 2 numbers. And when I get to the average setting, I stop the exposure. It almost always works pretty well. Let's see here. Larry says, you mentioned your lens shutter speeds are set in 1-stop increments. Is it true that all lenses or some are set to continuous increments between? So basically the shutter speeds are going to be in full stops. And that is a real big annoyance. Because because it kind of puts you in between. Apertures, they're continuous. You can have it wherever you want, but it's marked in third stop. All the lenses I've ever worked with, the shutter speeds are in full stop increments. So you 3-stop ND filter allowed me to lengthen the exposures to a longer exposure time. Ben says, is it true that you can bench a whole Alan Brock? No, I definitely cannot. Let's see. What's up, fellow San Diegan? Do you still have your 6x17 camera? And if so, consider shooting it in occasions. I actually sold my 6x17 camera. I really enjoyed that camera. I just didn't use it enough. So I did sell it. At some point, I wouldn't mind picking one up again. The 6x17, I don't know if any of you have shot that format. It's interesting because if you look at the photos, once you have them scanned and everything, it looks like a breath of fresh air. There's something about that format which is so visually, it just looks really, really good. But when you're posing a photo, you feel like you're trying to squeeze so much into like a little narrow area. So that was a frustration with me when working with the large format setup, or with the 6x17 camera. Let's see. Terry says, I have a Tacoma 4x4 4-door. It has 5-foot bed and a canopy. I'm 6'2", but it sleeps pretty comfortably, and I can stretch out diagonally. That's something I've definitely heard that people can do diagonally. I'd probably go for the long bed if I ever had to, but yeah, it would barely fit in my garage. Let's see here. Is Ektachrome out for 8x10? Would you try it? There's a group buy going on for that right now, and I checked it out, but I have not bought any. I did recently buy 3 boxes of Velvia, or of Provia 100. Let's see. Are you going to participate in Ted Forbes Light Challenge? At this point, I don't seem to have enough time in the day just working on all the things I'm working on, but it does look like it'd be kind of a fun thing to do. Let's see here. Any chance you'll come out east to shoot? Probably not in the near future. I know there's some really beautiful stuff out there, but for how I get around, I basically drive just because I have so much stuff I have to lug around with me. And the fact I just kind of live in my 4Runner like a little mini motorhome, and it's a long drive. And there's also so many things that are nearby that are a little easier to access. But it's someday I wouldn't mind getting out there. Let's see here. Will says that he actually knows some people that put fake eyes on the back of their hats to deceive mountain lions into thinking they're not facing away from them. I could see how that would work. There's a lot of instinct in them. Ben says, "Hey Ben, now it's clear that you can't walk on water. How do you keep yourself dry when you cross streams, creeks?" My feet get wet. I wear wool socks, and I never have any issues with my feet being wet when I'm hiking. If it was for many days, yeah, that would probably be an issue. But I just go right through the creek. I don't even worry about it. Let's see here. Yeah, and then Will points out that it's Canem who's doing the group buy for the 8x10. Let's see here. What's your thoughts on car tracks and stuff like that on places like Racetrack, Playa, and Death Valley? It takes a very special person to look at a place like Racetrack, Playa, or some of the salt flats in Death Valley and to say, "Hey, I'm going to drive out there." It's absolutely boggles the mind that people think that that's a good idea. The photo that I shot on the first day of my trip to Death Valley, the little creek there in the mountains, it was pretty pristine out there. But I'm really close to the road. I mean, I'm probably 200 feet from the road, something like that. But when I scan that film way off in the distance, you can actually see some tracks where someone had driven out there. And also I should mention that a lot of those areas, the ground is really soft. So if a person is not smart enough to actually do that, there's a really good chance they're going to get stuck. So definitely, yeah, it's a horrendous idea for people that think they can do that. Let's see. Not sure if you've answered this already, but what got you started with photography? I took a photography class in high school, and it was something that was kind of interesting. I was sort of captivated by the process. It was shooting a film camera. The first camera I had was a Rebel film camera, and it was definitely pretty fun. But actually, before that, I'm looking to see if I have it up over here. I don't see it in reach right now, but as a kid growing up, went on camping trips with my family, and had like a little point and shoot film camera, and it'd be cool if I could find some pictures in that. But I think it's just something kind of nice about the process. Just a mix of technical and artistic. So, and also just enjoying the outdoors. So kind of goes hand in hand. Let's see here. Beyond the techie stuff, what long-term social benefit do you hope to achieve with your work? That's a tough one. I don't know that maybe some people set out to do that. I think for a lot of times it's kind of just a byproduct of stuff along the way. You see something that just doesn't look quite right in the field, whether it's, the people driving in areas where they're supposed to drive, or, people littering stuff. So I think, showing a good example of picking up litter and enjoying the outdoors and all that. But I don't really have anything beyond that. I will say that there is something very, certain photos, they have a really, I wouldn't say healing effect. That doesn't sound right, but it's very calming to look at certain photos. So that's something I do enjoy when people do appreciate the photos from that sense. Let's see here. Richard says, I've noticed in recent months that you have questioned whether film is the right medium. Might you consider digital capture in the coming years? This is something that has come up, and it is a source of frustration at times in the field, because there are certain times when things are changing really fast, like that first day in Death Valley, where I was about. I mean, it would have been so much easier if I had a digital camera with me that day. But I will say that even though it can be difficult with times, it forces me to work in a way that makes me more satisfied with the images in the long run. And so there'll be like the trip I'm sharing currently from Death Valley. So far, there's only maybe one photo I've shared that I'm pretty happy with, which is the one on the first day. But as the trip progresses, I start capturing some more photos I really do enjoy. And a lot of those photos, I look back at them and I feel like I made the right decisions on it. And in some ways, those photos feel like they are, I don't know, it's hard to describe, but they stand the test of time a little bit more. I don't look back at them with any sort of regret. So that's one of the things that I do enjoy about working with film. But yeah, it can really be a difficult time sometimes in the field when things aren't going quite right, or I'm not able to capture photos in the way that I wanted to. And let's see here. Any plans to get to the UK or to Europe? Honestly, not really. I there's so much stuff at home that I'm sort of concentrating on that. And the thought of having to travel overseas with the way I do photography right now would be honestly quite intimidating because of the film, the camera gear, and everything else. Maybe someday, but I got a lot of stuff close to home to keep me occupied. Let's see here. Do you photograph any other genres for yourself? How do you find yourself interacting with landscape photos from others, both contemporary and historic? I basically, all the photography you see me do on the YouTube channel is the only photography that I do. I don't really do anything else other than cat pictures on my iPhone, and there's plenty of those. And I think a lot of it's because I'll go into the field for a week at a time, and I will find I'll basically put in a lot of effort over the course of a week, and then come back, and then over several months I can kind of work on those images. I'm keeping busy even when I'm at home. How do you find yourself interacting with the landscape photos from others? That's a good question. I honestly really haven't studied too much on historic photos. That say that there are certain photographers who work really inspires me to do what I do. And one of the big inspirations is Charles Kramer. If you guys haven't seen his work, you really need to look it up. Absolutely beautiful work. And he actually wrote the foreword for the book I have coming out pretty soon. So I was very, very thankful for that. So huge, huge influence to me. Also, one thing here that as it's been about 40 minutes or so, so we're kind of getting close here. But one thing here, I'm going to post this so you guys can see. I don't know if this is backwards for you. It's backwards for me. Maybe normal for you guys. But if you go to benhorn.com/livestream, you will see a giveaway. So basically, I'm going to give away a copy of my 2019 portfolio box set because I have a few of those that are made up and are ready to go. Just as a thank you for you guys being here. Let's see a few more questions here. Have you participated in gallery showings? Any scheduled in the near future? I was supposed to do Art Walk this year, which was an event in like late this month, which has certainly been canceled because of the COVID-19 situation. And I bumped my setup to August. There was another event going on, so we'll see how that works. But I haven't really done any official gallery shows. It takes a lot of money to prepare the work and the frames and everything. So I haven't. Maybe at some point in the future, we'll see that. Let's see here. Do you ever do prints in the darkroom or all your printmaking done by scanning negatives? I haven't done anything ever in the darkroom with the large format setup. At some, I'd love to do some platinum palladium printing with from some negatives at some point. So kind of darkish room in a way. But all my prints are made with Epson P7000 printer, which you can't see, but it's over there. Let's see here. What's your philosophy on whether the difficulty of capturing an image makes it more valuable, or is the quality impact of the image paramount, regardless of the challenge or ease of achieving it? So I am a firm believer that if you work harder for an image, you will value it more. The question is, does that translate to other people valuing it more? And I think if putting in that effort allows you to work harder for it, hopefully that should come through in the image. I will say that some of the images I've worked for the hardest are ones I still do enjoy the most. But I don't know how. It'd be interesting to see how the perception is different if I were to list, some of my favorite photos. But it doesn't mean that just working hard for a photo makes it a good photo. But I think just it allows you to be a little more careful about things and to consider things a little bit more, which hopefully does come through in the photo. Do large format lenses have diffraction issues with digital? 100%, they certainly do. Just the numbers you hit it will be much higher. I shoot f45 on 8x10 for almost everything because that gives a good balance of depth of field versus diffraction. But I've taken pictures at f64 and like f72, somewhere in that range. And I started to see some softening in those, which made me not want to use those aperture settings. So f45 has been pretty good. Dash Doctor says, any more collector's edition books going to be made? It's going to be limited to just 100 as far as I know, and those did sell through. I actually made the prints for those the other day as the book process is going along. And again, thank you for everyone who did order a copy of the book. I do really appreciate that, especially now with all the craziness that is going on. It should come together as a pretty cool project. Let's see here. I've noticed you're using map satellite imagery to plan shots. What do you look for? So in Death Valley, if you look at the satellite imagery, you can look out at the salt flats and look for like little dry streams or different patterns. There's some areas that have some dots that you can actually see on the satellite imagery that are these big dots on the ground. I look for canyons. I look for the angle of things. A lot of it's just kind of browsing the salt flats or looking at some of the little narrow slot canyons that are at the base of the mountains. And you'll see in some of the videos where I hike up to some of those. In a place like southern Utah, there's all these canyon systems. And in those areas, what I look for is I look for canyons that have little bends to the canyons. At the bends of the canyons, you usually have some pretty nice light. I look forward to see if there's some trees down in the canyon, because that usually means cottonwood trees. And especially if it's against a canyon wall. And with the 3D satellite imagery, if you can kind of move things around, you can see if there's desert varnish that sort of drains down. And so it gives a good feeling of what you can find there. But that's the sort of stuff that I look for. I do really like how some of the areas, like Zion, has a really good high resolution 3D maps you can pull up, and it almost feels like you're there, which is kind of cool. Let's see here. Things are flying by here. How do you plan your trips? What apps do you use? How do you decide exactly where to go? What to do after the months of planning? So it's kind of what I was talking about with the previous thing, as far as like the satellite imagery. That's one of the things I really do look at. I don't really use any apps other than just Google Earth. I use that a lot. And a lot of it's based on, I'll go to an area, I'll get a good feeling for that area, and then I kind of, branch off a little further and a little further and kind of go to some of these areas. Let's see here. David says, are you self-publishing your book or using Blurb? The book is being produced by Kozo Books out of the UK. And so they're handling the design, the distribution. I'm handling the content as far as the images and then the text and the type and all that. So it's an effort between Kozo Books and myself. And they recently did Adam Gibbs' book, which turned out beautiful as well. So I'm hoping that'll be somewhere in that same range. Let's see here. And okay, it says, Alan says, it occurs to me during your most recent trip to Zion that you take mainly detail shots that could be taken in one of the dozens of canyons. Do you intentionally avoid the grand landscape? So here's the thing about Zion. Zion is a complete sensory overload sort of location. I remember the first time I drove through Zion, I went there as a kid, but the first time I drove through Zion was back in, I think, 2006, 2007. And there's a certain area of the park where the road just kind of winds through all these crazy hills of sandstone and stuff. I remember just clutching the steering wheel, just kind of looking up at everything. It is complete sensory overload. And what you find is that stuff is absolutely beautiful, but it is really difficult to shoot. It's hard to get good light on it. It depends on having interesting skies. Accessibility can be difficult because there's some pretty remote areas that are pretty sketchy to climb up to areas, before sunrise and stuff. But what you find is that those areas with all those huge towering sandstone cliffs, they are the best light reflectors in the world. So there's been times when I'm just walking through the canyon and I'll see, everything's in like harsh sunlight in front of me, but then you step into the shade. And when you step into the shade, you have light bouncing and reflecting off cliffs, and everything just looks absolutely purely magical at your feet. And so I think when people visit Zion for the first time, they think of those cliffs, they think of everything. But from a photographer's standpoint, it's the smaller scenes on the ground in that really beautiful reflected light that I think tells some of the bigger stories of the landscape. So yeah, that's why I don't shoot a lot of grand landscapes in Zion. I do more grand landscape stuff in Death Valley because it's a little better suited for that. Richard says, how do you balance being careful and overworking a composition? First instinct is key. And this is also true for if you're making a print of your photo. That first glance, I think, tells you a lot about the composition and whether it's going to work pretty well. I will oftentimes set up a composition, then I'll kind of walk away from it. I'll come back to it. I'll look at it again with fresh eyes. And I find that helps a lot. If I'm trying to evaluate a print and how good the print is, I'll sometimes just hold the print up in front of me. I'll close my eyes and then open your eyes, and you see that first instinct of the print. And then you'll notice things that otherwise your eye doesn't notice. And that's why I'll just set up a composition, return to the scene, look at it again. I think that really helps out. See, the book will be just a collection of images, or will it come with a story behind the photos in your overall journey? There'll definitely be stories that accompany most of the photos, depending on the layout. So I will have a lot of writing to do, and we'll see how that all works out. I think everyone would be curious to see what you would produce if you added a few new national parks to your annual schedule. Maybe when photography fully replaces a day job. I do agree on that. I would love to add another trip each year. I'm actually planning on a summer trip this year, if that all works out. I want to revisit the White Mountains and do some photography up there with the bristlecones. But yeah, if I am at some point able to do this full time, then probably every few months or so I'll go on a trip and then get back and work on all the stuff. Why film instead of digital? It does cost a lot. I will say that if any of you have ever had the opportunity to sit down and look at a light box with a large format transparency, I mean, like a 35 millimeter slide or a medium format is also really, really good in this regard. But with large format where you can lay it down, put the loop on there, and just study that image, it's like pure magic. So I think combination of that, just that, and you'll never be able to print the photo the way that that looks, but it's a combination of that plus it making you work hard, and every shot costing $30 also is a way of kind of helping out the motivational process of trying to get stuff. It says, was 2013 your first book? That was I think that was the first year I did one of the books. Yeah, I think so. I can't remember. It's been a little while, but that does sound about right. Maybe I think 2013. On average, how far are you hiking to take your photograph? So it really depends on the location. So a place like Zion, honestly, not very far. A lot of the areas I visit in Zion, I can park, and usually I'm not hiking more than a half mile or a mile. And actually in that case, I can leave my camera in the truck, go cover a lot of ground, find something, go back, get my camera, and then shoot the photo. Place like Death Valley, again, it's a pretty accessible area, so I'm not usually going that far. But when I go on my backpacking trips, that's when I'm going quite a ways. In some cases, maybe 10 miles a day, something like that. I know my most rigorous day I've ever had, I did 35,000 steps in a day. That was my backpacking trip last year. And my legs were shaking at the end of the day. It was too much. Are you considering any digital cameras at present? If I did, I'd probably get a Sony A7R4. But it's a lot of money to spend on a camera that I probably wouldn't use as much as I should. Have you thought of taking a trip to Bryce Canyon? I've been there before. I've never done a photo trip there before. It'd be nice at some point, but I feel like there's more potential in areas like Zion where there's so many smaller scenes, and Bryce may very well have that as well. Let's see here. Also say Bend. Yeah, I've seen some great stuff from Big Bend. I've never been there before. I've seen some stuff. Let's see, being in San Diego, do you ever shoot seascapes? Seascapes are one of the most difficult things I've ever had to try to photograph on large format. A lot of it has to do with when I'm shooting with large format, I kind of have to put my stuff on the ground as far as the lenses, film holders, all the stuff I'm not using. It's usually sitting on the ground somewhere. And you can't really do that very much because, first of all, if it's an area where the water isn't, it's probably going to be sandy, which can get everywhere. But also, if you're shooting in certain areas, the water is going to be coming in, rogue waves, stuff like that. So that's a challenge. The other thing too is with large format, you have some relatively narrow windows for good light to work with, and then you also need to time that with the waves being in the right area. It's basically, it's just a real big challenge. Maybe some longer lens stuff would be easier, but I don't think I'm going to be. I love seascape stuff. I appreciate it, but yeah, it's a panic attack if you try to do that on large format. Plus, it's really crowded at the beach, and it's nice not to have everyone coming up to you and asking if it's a hospital that you're shooting, which is the number one question I always get if I'm ever out there. Let's see here. It says, hi, Ben. How much time do you spend up in Club Canyon, part of Zion? I'm sure you've done it, but I can't recall specific examples right now. So Clock Canyon is a really beautiful part of Zion. Really wild area. I have, I think, just one photo that I've taken there. It was some leaves and some oil, and I was actually just editing that photo earlier today. Um, it's a really cool area. It's quite a ways away from the main part of the park. Not a lot of people visit it, which makes it really, really ideal. And there's a lot of exploring to be had. I wanted to visit it a bit more in the fall of last year, but I didn't get out there as much as I wanted to. But I would definitely like to be back there again at some point. It's a beautiful area. Let's see here. A couple more questions before we wrap this up. Nigel logged in there. Nigel says, I love your intimate scenes. Which do you prefer to shoot? These are or the larger landscapes? With large format, 100% the smaller scenes. It makes life so much easier. You have consistent light over the scene, which makes life so much easier. You usually have less issues with wind. And it's a much more Zen-like experience, which is one of the things I do enjoy. And you have a much larger window when you can photograph something, whether it's some beautiful leaves on the ground or something. You could have the same beautiful light on that scene for like 2 hours. So there's no rush, which is one of the nice things about it. With the grand landscapes, you have these really narrow windows where you have to time everything perfectly. And yeah, as seen on the first day of my Death Valley trip, it was just a total stress case that day. So that's why I enjoy doing that. But I know that those photos don't necessarily, the people may not relate to them quite as much, but I think it's one where sometimes you have to see it in print to really appreciate it, especially a little bit of a larger print, because it feels really real that way. Let's see. Alan says, think you'll ever go back to Subway? I would love to go to Subway, but not take my camera. I think it'd be a much more enjoyable hike. I think I'm done photographing there because I got the shot I wanted. But it is a beautiful hike. Though I will say that when Alan flew us over Subway and just banked the plane just right over Subway, that was probably my favorite Subway visit right there. Let's see here. Another question here. Do you ever clean up any clutter, twigs, leaves, etc. on location before exposing the film? I do if it is an obvious that seems it's going to be just a bad thing for the photo. Generally, I don't do a heck of a lot, but if I see like a twig over something that just looks like it's just going to get in the way, I'll move it out of the way. And I usually actually try to put it back exactly where it started. There's also been times when I was on a backpacking trip and I was shooting in a wash, but there was this young sapling that was just poking right up in my frame. So it was really flexible. I just gently kind of bent it down, put a rock on the top of it just to have it, out of the way for a little while. And when I was done, I pulled the rock off and it sprung back to life again there. All right. Well, I think after about an hour, we are good on that. And again, just as one last reminder, if you guys go to benhorn.com/livestream, you can enter to win a 2019 box set. And I will announce that probably a little later this week. And I got more Death Valley videos coming up. And also I do want to thank those of you guys who have ordered a copy of the book. And that's something that we're working on in the background. But I want to thank you guys so much for joining us, me and the cats, I guess, here for the live stream. And maybe we'll do this again sometime. So thanks, everyone. And we'll see you around.